I'm here with C. Michael Smith. Michael, it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you. I've read your book, Young Shamanism in Dialogue.
Wow.
I found it really resonant with some of the connections I've made over the years. And I'm especially interested in the work you've developed since then, which you're calling a little psychology of the heart. And that also resonates with my heart. So, really happy to have you here, and I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. I'm delighted to be here and see what we cook up together. Happy you read the book. I wrote it a long time ago, and if you want to dive into that, I'm ready to do it.
Yeah. It's it's one of those things. You write a book, and it lives. It lives on,
Mhm.
and people discover it anew even 30 years after you wrote it. So I hope this isn't too much looking back to the past, but I'm interested in your journey toward writing that book. What brought you to put Jung and shamanism into dialogue?
Oh, yeah. So that goes back about 40 years. Around the time I was age 32, and I had a spiritual awakening, really. Stan Groff would call it a spiritual emergency, really. And I had been doing psychedelics, and uh, suddenly I started seeing this uh, big eagle-like creature in the trees. At first, it was only at night, and then it was in the daytime, and then it was when I was driving my car. And on one occasion, I'm on my way to my office, and the road opens up, and uh, the car just dives in like to the netherworld. And there's all kinds of numinous entities there, and I'm deeply fascinated. But I'm also doing about 65, 70 miles an hour going down a two-lane highway. And it was all I could do to pull myself out of that state. I was aware that I was driving. So I had like a divided consciousness, knowing I was driving, yet my attention, the road didn't even exist, so pulling myself back out. And long story short, when I came back out of that, I said to my now ex-wife that this is what happened. And number one, she didn't share my kind of experiences, and thought it strange. But she said, don't just don't go to a psychiatrist or anything like that. They're going to put you on the drugs, the suppressive ones. He said, I think the Jungian analysts get back into analysis, because I had been into analysis. So I did. I spent a couple sessions with this guy, Tom Kapusinskis, and he said, I think in the second session, I know what this is. This is a shamanic awakening.
Hmm.
It's a kind of a crisis, and what you really need is a medicine man. I can hold a supporting structure, but let's find you somebody that knows about this thing.
Wow.
And so that took a few months, and I ended up going up to northern Canada, and I did a vision quest. But I was up there 2 weeks on an island called Windshift Island. It's in the middle of Lake Temagami, which is a huge lake with hundreds of islands on it.
Yeah, I'm originally from Ontario, actually.
Oh, okay. It's a beautiful, it's a stunning place. And I was by this place called, I think it was Bear Mountain. It's like a Ojibwe Vision Quest spot. And there were other people. I was not the only one, but I was invited on this trip, and drove up there from where I live. I think it was about 16-hour drive straight north.
Hmm.
And the road kept getting narrower until it was a dirt road, and then there was a little airport by the water with a plane, hydroplane on the water. And I paid that guy, I don't know, $150 or something to fly me to Windshift Island and land, and asked him to come back in 2 weeks, which he did.
So,
Um,
Windshift Island, is there anyone living on that island?
uh, at the time, there was a guy named Dave Knudsen who owned that island, so to speak, and had a retreat center there.
Hmm.
The island I went to for the Vision Quest was off that some ways. I used a canoe, actually a Voyager canoe, to get to. I looked at a lot of islands, but I wanted to be totally alone and out there. But I spent about a week in sweat lodges and stuff, and then started fasting a few days before, and then did a morning sweat lodge and got in the canoe and went straight out to my island. Probably has a name, but there were no humans on it, just animals, the forest. It was incredible.
Mm.
And fasted 4 days and nights, which was something of a challenge because at first I fell out of the canoe into the water, and then that was frustrating. It was kind of a rocky bottom and stuff, but I pulled myself up onto land. I had a few items that I had brought with me, but it's just be the first time in my life to go without water or food for 4 days and nights.
Mm.
And I did drink of the water, and that was a mistake, right out of the lake. It looked so pure, but I got a bad case of dysentery. So this was part of my vision quest,
Mm.
And I picked a couple of berries when I was wrestling with the hunger. But really, I'm in it, like by the second day, I'm okay with the hunger. And it didn't even bother me. I mean, I wasn't even having hunger pains. And I battled mosquitoes, things like that. But these are common kinds of experiences, to be having hunger pains and mosquitoes, something like that.
Yeah, and to
But
get to fall out of your canoe into the water. It seems to me whenever I'm going on a meaningful quest of some kind, there's always an element of humiliation involved.
yeah, I had to process some anger. And for the first day and a half or so, my mind is active. So it's just thinking and analyzing and remembering. And so finally, I'm so sick of thinking.
Yeah.
I can't stand it, and it just stops. And for most of the rest of the experience, there's no thought really. There's clouds floating by, there's images in the heavens, there's interactions with the birds, and, some chipmunks and squirrels and that sort of thing.
Right,
I
more
attained
just
a deep,
dropping into presence, it sounds like.
yeah, right. And I'm sitting on the ledge. These islands are really fragments of glaciers. So there's lots of stony rock and stuff. So I'm sitting on the edge by the water where I kind of made my circle to stay in. And there was a big stone. I'm sitting nearby. And in that thoughtless space, that stone was so alive and beautiful. It was just a stone, but I'd put water on it and it would change colors. So I think it was granite. The beauty of it just really struck me. And then this deep intuitive insight, what the Toltecs call silent knowledge, happened, that this was like a metaphor for my life. And that what I'm about is being as real as that stone is real, being what I am, and how to help other people connect with that in themselves. Because I was connecting with it and had been before I arrived at the island, but now it was conscious what I was connecting with. And the stone itself seemed to be a symbol for the heart and the heart path, and just being what you are and not some pretending persona or something like that.
Well,
So
it's amazing you say that, actually. It strikes me. I was in my first period of working with ayahuasca in the Santo Daime Church. After a number of ceremonies, I was down in outside of Portland, attending some ceremonies there, and I received my first hymn. So the whole doctrine of that church comes from received hymns, and I received one. And the first line is, "My heart is a stone that I've placed in this river,
oh
to be
wow.
smooth and polished by the lessons I'm taught."
Mm.
So that resonates, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how old are you at this point?
uh 34, 35, something like that.
Right on
uh,
schedule for a midlife reawakening.
yeah, I didn't see it that way at the time, but it was. What I wanted to tell you about it was that it somehow grounded me. I then saw, what my life can be about, and I said yes to it.
Mm.
And so from there, then I had to tool up to, get a vehicle to make myself of service, and hence getting the doctorates and getting a psychology license, going to Jung Institute, all that was like creating a vessel by which I could do what I could do. And all the
Wow.
time I'm in Jungian analysis. So this kind of tamed this wild hallucinatory, so I could have the experience when I chose, but not be just blown about by it.
Right. So up until that point, what had you been doing with your life?
Well, I was already, first of all, I should say I was an ordained minister, and I was not happy in that. Okay,
Oh,
so that was kind of my crossroads. And when I was in seminary, I'd also gotten a master's in counseling psychology. So I made this shift. But what I noticed was I wasn't really doing psychology. Okay, I mean, it's psychotherapy. The people that were coming to me sometimes were in extreme states, and I would just know what to do, but I didn't know how I knew how to do it. And even the staff in the clinic I worked with were very curious about how I knew what to do. Like, this little girl was in a car accident, her family was killed. She's in a hospital and she's not talking. And after 2 weeks, I got a call and they asked me if, I'd be willing to see this girl. And they brought her in, and she was all beat up from the accident. She lost her mother, her father, and siblings in this car crash, and was left with um, relatives and a multi-million-dollar endowment. So relatives were fighting over who's going to get custody of her because of the money.
mm,
This is the sort of thing. And I just asked them to please shut up and bring her to my office every day. And I had lunch with her, and she didn't talk, but I was very fine with that. She didn't need to talk. Look at the hell she'd just been through, She
yeah.
wasn't ready to talk yet. So, and I'd offer her some food. Sometimes she'd take it from my hand. But one day, I started playing checkers with myself. I'd move around. She's seated right beside me, and I'd play both sides of the checkerboard, And that went on for 3 or 4 days. And finally, I just turned the checkerboard towards her like it was her move. And she jumped a couple pieces I had set up so that she would do it. She was 9 years old. And I looked at her in surprise, and she giggled and then began to talk to me. It was just a very natural thing. But that's how I was operating. I didn't learn that from a textbook or from school or anything, and whoever I was seeing, I was working that way. But I didn't have a license to practice. I had this degree, but, I felt like I hadn't been properly trained.
Mm,
And I wasn't sure psychotherapy was right for me anyway. So that was kind of the crossroads. And that led me to the Vision Quest, which eventually led me to the University of Chicago. I had already made contact with Mircea Eliade, this great historian of religions that had written a big book on shamanism.
yeah.
And he mentored me a bit, and then he recommended me to Robert Moore. So
Mm,
that's how I came to work with Robert Moore. And I brought my shamanic experiences to Moore, and he was fascinated. And he was fascinated with my indigenous experiences too. And so he asked me to write the Young Shamanism book,
mhm.
which I did because I thought, great, that'll be a platform for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious, like, just to go over that history a little bit. So you go to seminary, you're working as a minister and like a pastoral counselor.
Mhm.
Why did you start to experiment with psychedelics? Because it seems like that would be something that would be discouraged, I think, for someone in that role, if I'm correct.
Yeah, right. That whole ministry thing didn't really fit me well. I liked actually studying philosophy and theology. So, and a lot of that was to break away from my father's cartography, the one he had imposed on me as a child. And he was an evangelical minister
Hmm.
with a very narrow view, a very pessimistic view, really, of life. And that never sat well with me somehow intuitively. So I decided I'm going to read everything that he doesn't want me to read, philosophically, theologically, scientifically. So it was like a Toltec reworking of my belief system.
Hmm.
And when I came out of that, I was about to be ordained, but I was already, I'm not sure this is right for me, and I did it for 3 years, and people at the church loved me, but others complained that I was really doing psychology or something. This is not ministry, this is not
Yeah.
the gospel. And I said, I think you're right, you know. Yeah, so then I thought, well, I'll try, psychotherapy. And you used the word pastoral counseling. That was the route open to me. I didn't really need the license. I could actually do it that way. And so that's what I did. But I was not satisfied with using that framework because you had to be a member of a church. My ordination had to be under something like a bishop's control, So I didn't like these ties, these people telling me what my belief systems can be,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
So psychedelics helped me further break out of that, I think. And I'd used them as a teenager, from 17 to 19. And then here it was, I don't know how many years later, 15 years later, and I wanted to try them again, and it just blew open my world spiritually and psychologically.
Yeah, I can relate. So you meet Mircea Eliade, who's,
Mhm.
yeah, kind of a legend, anthropologist, scholar of religion, wrote a big fat book on yoga, wrote a big fat book on shamanism, on rites of initiation, and really difficult for me to kind of get into that style of writing.
Mhm.
But he influenced someone who was a great translator for me, who you also mentioned, Robert L. Moore,
Oh,
who listeners would know from authoring primarily King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, but he also wrote a great book on the archetype of initiation. Um, Another one called Facing the Dragon, about confronting grandiosity. Um, so he's been a great translator of some of that scholarly work for me, who, mostly a layperson. So, what was it like when you met Robert Moore? What was that relationship like?
well, we had an interesting relationship. He really liked me. At the same time, he kind of feared me. What I mean by this, I took all of his courses and everything that came out in his books later about the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, all that. He was doing courses on that stuff. So I took all of those. And during those courses, I was very active in the classes. Sometimes he would turn them over to me to do something with shamanism, or even something about Eliade. And he seemed to enjoy that. But one day he called me into his office and he said, I don't know whether to tear your face off or give you my blessing.
Hmm.
I said, why? And in a very grandiose way, he says, this country is not big enough for the two of us. And, I'm a student, trying to get his doctorate. Here's this big guy threatened by me. And this blew me away. I was very, very disappointed, but also a bit frightened of him after that point. But there were other times he would be quite warm to me. And he asked me to write this book later, you know,
Hmm.
for a series he was doing with Paulus Press on world spirituality and Jungian psychology and Buddhism, Hinduism, so on. And I did the one on Jungian shamanism. But I am indebted to him for really allowing me to create a platform for my life's work through writing that book.
Hmm.
So that was really cool. And that was 1990 is when he asked me to write it. I wrote it in 1991 after writing my dissertation, which became another book.
Oh, wow.
Uh, yeah, and I wrote them back to back. I finished the dissertation, got that approved. That became Psychotherapy and the Sacred. And then I just went straight into Jungian shamanism and dialogue. And the task there was to really correlate and go back and forth between Jung's life and work and really Eliade's model of shamanism, the information he had assembled there. There's a weakness in the book. It's overly reliant on Eliade. I've learned a lot about shamanism since Eliade. That's
Hmm.
different in some ways. But so I imagine a conversation between the two where you could go back and forth. I could lay out Jung's point of view on something like the center and the shamanic view of the heart, compare them that way, soul loss and dissociation, one being the shamanic lingo, soul loss, and the other being Jung's, that sort of thing. And I went through all the topics, the major topics around shamanism, as well as the major topics in Jungian psychology. And to do that, I read the entire collected works and all of Jung's letters. But I found in the collected works almost everything Jung said about shamanism was indebted to Eliade.
Hmm.
And Jung was doing alchemy, you may recall, from I think his 50s on to his 80s,
Yeah.
and looking for the metaphor there. And then Eliade introduced him to shamanism, and he saw a set of rich metaphors, and he starts quoting him in various articles that appear throughout the collected works.
Hmm.
There's quite a few references, but they're all indebted to what Eliade showed him.
Yeah.
I think,
Well,
yeah.
I guess he felt the impulse to go and kind of find out for himself in a certain capacity. Like he did go visit the Pueblo Indians in the American Southwest, and he went to Africa. And so there are some passages where he relates interacting with some of the medicine men and elders
Right.
in those cultures. And I know that their way of speaking about their indigenous psychology really resonated with him and influenced him. Although I don't know if he ever participated in any rituals himself.
Yeah, well, he certainly during his Red Book years, prior to those trips, those were in the 1920s, but in the 1914 to 18 period, Jung was doing his own little rituals and ceremonies that were based in Gnosticism and the work of Iamblichus. He was doing rituals, ceremonies. Active imagination was a part of that tradition. Jung just gave it a name, And later he built the tower, his chapel or sanctuary to Philemon, his guardian spirit or daimonion. So that was there in Jung. But the question is whether he did psychedelics, and Jung denied them. He was afraid of being called a mystic. So if he did do them, he did do mescaline, which is the one he's written about the most. He wanted to deny it for posterity because being accused of being a mystic in his era in Europe was like being accused of being an unsolid New Ager in our era. So he wanted his work to be received as something substantial and not just by an ungrounded, airy-fairy kind of guy.
Yeah,
But
nowadays we'd say we don't want to be accused of being woo-woo.
right. But one of my initiations shamanically was out in the desert around Sedona with Chris Whitmont, Edward Whitmont, who did work with Jung, and his partner, Sylvia Benton Pereira. We both had the same teacher, and we both were initiated, or three of us were initiated together out there. He asked me if I thought Jung did mescaline, and I said, I have no way of knowing. He says he did. He goes, well, I have friends in Zurich that said he did, he did the mescaline and was practicing magic. And some of that's been bantered about by some scholars. It's just hard to know. He certainly, his art, some of the art in Red Book is reminiscent of, look at Alex Gray's work. I mean, there's some psychedelic feel in the intensity and vividness of the imagery. It's possible, but we'll never know for sure, probably, unless some letters are discovered somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure, that he needed any help to get into that archetypal realm and have those visions. So, I'm curious, like writing this book, how did the process of engaging Jung and shamanism in dialogue, how did that affect the way that you worked with people?
Well, okay, so, I got the psychological doctoral education and all that statistical stuff for the board exams. But I wanted to be able to think shamanically with my clients as well as psychologically. For the sake of keeping records and maybe having to answer questions to insurance companies that may audit my records, I needed to be able to translate back and forth between the languages. So I might talk about soul loss with a particular client for whom that idiom might sound appropriate, feel right. But I'm not going to put that in my notes.
Hmm.
Okay, my documents. Okay. Simply because, they could get me into trouble, either legally or with the insurance companies, at least in the era in which I was doing this, which was, more than 30 years ago.
Probably still now, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I needed to speak two languages. And so what I did was I took every psychological concept that was important to me and that would pass the muster on records and translated it into shamanic language. Okay. So I didn't have to give up my integrity, but it's like being bilingual. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you.
So that's what the book was about for me, is giving myself this language. So I had a place to practice, which was called clinical psychology, but I really had this shamanic substance that I wanted to continue to express and use because it seemed quite powerful,
Hmm.
quite helpful to people.
How would you describe, I mean, how would you distinguish between the shamanic language versus the psychological language? Can you give us a sense of that?
Um, yeah, in the book, uh, which looks like that, Young Shamanism Dialogue, um, I do make fundamental statements like both shamanism and Jung acknowledge that something can be missing from the psyche or the personality system. That should not be missing, should be there. Shamans call it soul loss. It might be called repression or dissociation psychologically. Or something is there that should not be. Something's intruding. Shaman might call that an intrusion or a possession by a spirit or something like that. Um, this would be an upsurge from the unconscious or an autonomous complex hijacking the system and taking over, a psychological possession. That was a language Jung used for it too. So that's how I would do it. Does
Hmm.
that get at what you were asking?
Yeah, no, I feel that. I think one of the reasons why, like, I'll call it archetypal shamanism, which is a
Mm-hmm.
term that I've been using lately because shamanism is such a problematic term. It means so many things to different people. I'm really talking about the archetypal aspect of shamanism, so dealing with concepts like soul loss and possession and things like that. And I find that just, kind of as a layperson without a rigorous psychological education, I just understand those terms intuitively. Like they just feel right and they make sense to me. So I find that often my clients, maybe it's just because they're drawn to me, in my coaching
Mm-hmm.
practice, that they're very open and receptive to those kind of terms, the shamanic terms versus the more clinical psychological
Mm-hmm.
terms. Like
Right.
I think they just get it. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of this stuff is archetypal, is because it's just part of our human DNA or inheritance.
Yeah, right. And I agree with you. The shamanic metaphors are important. In my own work, I've revision my work every so many years. So Jungian shamanism is really taken up into a more basic language of the archetypal heart, and that taken up into psycho-shamanism, which is another word that suggests I have synthesized depth psychology and shamanic, so the language can flow fluidly. But I notice in my work with my own clients, I prefer the more mythic, poetic language that seems to grasp people, gives them an image they can hang on to, and they kind of intuitively get it. Whereas the psychological jargon sounds alienating,
Mm.
and it's like can turn them into a specimen or conjure up fears of uh, my viewing them as neurotic or crazy or something like that. So the mythopoetic language, I think, is more rich and gentle in its implications, but can
Yeah.
be more precise too.
Mm. Yeah, I think of it as like it's the language of the heart, and
Yeah.
it helps keep us connected, right? So that someone doesn't feel like they're kind of put under glass, and we're analyzing them as like a, a collection
Yeah.
of parts and neuroses and stuff. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, when you started practicing in this way, did you? I mean, were you welcomed with open arms into the Jungian or broader psychological community? Um, because you have such a you put such an emphasis on the your own shamanic aspect or experience. I don't hear a lot of that in the Jungian or psychological world. So I'm wondering if you ever felt any kind of resistance, or if it was welcome.
Well, actually, there's a pretty huge interest in my work, which is increasing amongst Jungian analysts around the world. In fact, I just last week before last, presented to the Society of Jungian Analysts in Moscow, an event sponsored by the International Society of Jungian Analysts and the Russian Academy of Sciences. And that was a 2.5 hour lecture that was videotaped along with some interviews they did to me prior to bring it to life. And then I came in live and did Q&A. And this lecture hall was filled out. There wasn't even standing room. And that's just in one country. But I found the same type of receptivity in Europe. All the avant-garde institutions on the West Coast use my book, usually multiple times in one semester. And during this past 6 months, with programs online, including analytic programs, my book sales grew 400%. That was mostly Jungian institutes throughout the world, as well as those West Coast graduate schools. But it did not have its initial takeoff like that. It came out 25 years ago, even though I wrote it 31 years ago. And it landed with good reviews, but it was kind of a heavy work. And the reviews came in kind of slow. And I thought it was all done 5 years later, but I did put out a second edition of it when my contract was up with Paulus Press. And that book took off, and it keeps gaining momentum, So it's a book's life is usually 5 years unless it becomes a classic, and which this one has now. But you don't have any control over its destiny. It's got a life of its own. And I'm just marveling watching the royalties come in this year like never before. How's that possible this far down the road? It's a nice thing, but it shows a lot's happening with Jungian psychology there. And I made a pretty good case for Jung being shamanic in essence.
Yeah. I think something else that might be happening, so I've done quite a bit of work with psychedelics, and that turned into counseling people who are working with psychedelics, helping them prepare for and integrate and understand those experiences and work with them. It became really clear to me that the existing psychotherapies that I was familiar with just weren't deep or expansive enough to really include those kind of experiences. So I circled back around to Jung, who I tried to get into when I was much younger, but just couldn't grasp. And then I found in my late 30s that finally I could understand what he was talking about because I'd had enough experiences of my own. And finally, I felt like I found a psychology that could hold all of the richness of my own experiences and help me make sense of them. And so I think that maybe the interest in your book has something to do with the resurgence of psychedelics in the wider culture and people looking for a way to ground those experiences in a Western psychological understanding.
Yeah, you're probably right. So back in 2012, I was invited to keynote for the conference on, it's really an ayahuasca-based conference on Amazonian shamanism in Iquitos.
Oh, yeah.
So I went down there to do it and discovered that there were all these ayahuasca centers using my book they're open to American English reading people. So they have programs.
Yeah, all the ayahuasca centers have a little mildewed library full of books that people can peruse.
Yeah. So I've gotten a number of clients that I mentor actually through the ayahuasca centers who picked up my book down there. It was totally unknown to me. I had no idea, They had reached the jungle. So yeah, probably it was viewed as kind of relevant, making sense and navigating all the rich levels of reality and vision and imagery that one goes through or can
Yeah.
with ayahuasca.
And like, what do we do with these visions? You know, how can
Uh,
we put these into practice in our life and have them inform our own growth and transformation? You know, uh, cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't cover that, you know?
right. So for 5 years, I continued to work in the Amazon, putting on workshops up to 3 times a year there, um, offering myself from the angle of really being a support to help one process what happens after the thing. And I enjoyed that very much. And what was really fun were people coming from all over the world and a lot of physicians coming. And this was enlightening for me that physicians were interested, in surrendering to the medicine and seeing what happens. And I also have a good neuroscience background and also a holotropic therapy background. I developed my own system called Sacred Breathwork, but I use that as a model for processing and integrating after the ceremonies.
Hmm.
So,
And, maybe as a way to illustrate how shamanism and Jung both inform your approach, could you talk about how you help people work with the visions that come to them in something like an ayahuasca ceremony?
yeah. So I encourage first in silence, putting something into artistic form. It doesn't have to be beautiful. Just get some paper out, do the Graphian mandala, make a big circle, okay? And stay in touch with your ceremony, what you experienced. And just have some watercolors or something, or it could be colored pens, but just start drawing, marking, things that express different aspects of that. So this is a nonverbal experience. You're in a very nonverbal space when you're doing psychedelic medicines of any sort, and ayahuasca especially. So coming out, honor where you're at and express from that level. So that's the first level of integration, of bringing that to the world, is just in terms of imagery and form, And then you might, if you're in a group setting, process it in a group. Every person shares, but nobody interprets. Okay, whatever is your experience is yours to figure out and let it open up. In fact, I encourage people to take these home, put it up on their walls in their bedroom or wherever they can see it, and let it continue to work on them.
Mm-hmm.
But in the group process, we develop dyads first. And so we'll pair people off, and they go off for a couple hours, taking a turn, an hour apiece, just sharing their experience, and using the painting that they've done, the mandala painting, as a reference point for the different facets, kind of holds the experience. And they may even think of things to add to it as they're doing this. And then I've asked them to not share the whole thing with the group when they come back, but to crux the essence of it down to the key element of the experience and what they got, maybe what they needed, and also how they're going to implement this, begin implementing it when they return home. So the implementation is important, and for them to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So what am I going to do to remember this and keep a hold of this and make use of it so it just doesn't float away like a dream is a very important part of the experience. And also letting them know that I and other people, we have a resource list, are available. If you should get overwhelmed with something, it can happen. It's important to get in touch with somebody that has a cartography that can hold this experience with you.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to the event, with my ceremonies in the jungle, I always worked alongside of a very seasoned curandera in the jungle. But I saw my responsibility primarily to assist them and to lay down a cartography a Western style, modern Western style cartography, and I use graphs in my synthesis with Jung to articulate that so people feel more normalized when they have some extreme experiences. They've already heard the map or maybe seen it illustrated because I'll put it on newsprint or whiteboard or whatever so that they kind of have a feel for it. So that helps support too. It's like, oh yeah, he said this is possible and that. And so they don't freak out
Yeah.
over it.
Yeah.
So that,
I think one of the things that is so disturbing for people when they have an ego dissolution experience is that unless they have some kind of spiritual or religious foundation that offers them a cartography like that, when the small self dies, it can feel like you're just you're dying, like literally dying, and it gets mixed up with that because they don't have that map of the psyche that lets them know that, well, even if you haven't had the experience, just go with it that there is something more to you, and that when the ego dies, there's something left, right?
right.
So it's not so
So,
terrifying.
so in the Peruvian Amazon, the various tribes, there's more than 60 of them in the area around Iquitos. Um, they it's not everybody doesn't take the medicine. It's primarily the shamans take the medicine to see what's needed for the patient, and it's the coming of the gringo Westerner since about 1990, really, to the jungle. That shifted that into, at least with the gringos that come, that's what they call us, that, they get to take the medicine like the shaman. But even in those societies where the whole community seems to be taking it, like the Shipibo, um, they already have a mythologia that holds all of that, mythology. They call it mythologia. And so they can expect anything. They've got a belief system that's flexible and rich enough that's not even, that doesn't have to be established.
Yeah.
They're born and domesticated into it. And then the other thing is they live in a community. So the community becomes a containing vessel. But we in modern civilized life don't know much about community. We don't really live in those kind of communities where we're all in touch with each other and getting together regularly for rites of passage and celebrations. But in these societies, the community is everything. It's the main thing. And ayahuasca has been used to help integrate them, and bond them and renew their mythological roots and so on. So we have to, coming from outside those indigenous cultures, we have to create some substitute for that, because you do need a mythology that supports it, and you do need some community context. To be alone with this stuff is what made so many people go crazy in the 60s, because that stuff wasn't in place.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that cartography that you use to contextualize the experience?
Yeah, sure. So I usually just start with what Jung called the number one personality. That's the ego persona configuration. It's our everyday way of relating to the world that's congruent with modern science, materialism, greed, all that.
And
It
social
goes,
norms and things.
yeah, right. So that's the thing that's locked us into hell, or to a very limited world. So we're going to expand that. So there's going to be kind of an ego death. And that can be a little disconcerting because when ego death happens, it can be some of your suppressed shadow qualities come up. That can be terrifying. You don't realize they're your own. You see them, or maybe you do realize they're your own. Either way, you get terrified, and you can panic or freak out. So if you know, it's normal for that to come up, and if you tell them ahead of time, just breathe, relax into it. If you feel nauseated, great. If you feel like you got to vomit, here's the pail. Okay. So that's second level. Okay. Another level then beyond the initial counter with the dark energies or the shadow energies is a visionary plane that you could call astral or subtle. uh, where uh, the spirits can come in. I recall a ceremony in the jungle around Iquitos where a jaguar, I saw the shadow walking around the Maloka, and then it comes through the screen. It's all screened in. It comes through the screen and jumps into this lady's body.
Hmm.
At that point, I just went to check on her to make sure everything's okay. This is a big animal. And sitting next to her is a guy that's a plastic surgeon, as a friend of hers, And I just touched her a little bit. And I said, is everything okay? And she goes, yeah, I just got a jaguar, And the surgeon said to me, and he opened his mouth and showed me his teeth. They were diamonds. So this is a true hallucination. I mean, three people are seeing the same entity here. So that's part of the subtle or astral world that is really opened and it's really vivid. Okay.
Okay, let's pause there for a moment. This is something that fascinates me and something that I wrestle with in my own attempt to understand, make sense of these experiences. Now, we talked earlier about how you've bridged shamanism and psychology, right? So, do you have a psychological view of what's happening there? Like, is this like the collective unconscious making itself real in the visionary state, or what's happening there? Are we all like kind of dipping into the same pool of the collective unconscious at that point?
I think in that case we were, but there can be people in other realms, even other morphic fields, as Sheldrake calls them. Yeah, that would be Jung's term for the spirit world, and he said a spirit world was actually a more precise term, but it doesn't fly in modern culture. And so he translates all his mystic shamanic experiences into things like archetype, anima, complex, autonomous complex, so he tries to wrap it back in number one personalities language. But for him, this stuff was really alive. And an archetype, when he defines it as a primordial image, this is a living being, an entity that you're interacting with. Yes, he would say it's in the collective unconscious or the spirit world. So he does the translating there, and I'm comfortable with that, But for him, a lot of people don't realize this. He said the psyche stretches out through the whole cosmos. So we are all in it. It's an error to think it's just inside you. Earlier on in his work, he thought that, in this Freudian era, but he came to his own experiences to sense it was the anime cosmose, the cosmic soul that everything participates in.
Yeah, I'd say the psyche isn't in us, we're in psyche, right?
Yeah, right. So, and I would say indigenous mythologies and maps would pretty much agree. They'd be pretty much comfortable with that. What you call it's just difference in language, but at that point, you're acknowledging something transpersonal.
Mm.
Okay, beyond the human is interacting with the human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think's happening with something like ayahuasca that allows us all to have that same shared vision? It's like sharing a dream while half awake, right?
Maybe not even half awake. It depends on the person, but yeah,
Right.
right. I mean, we're so in it that we might not be much aware of anything else at the time we're in
Sure.
it, which is just fine when you're in it. Although if you have to go to the bathroom or something, you get up, you have to reorient pretty quick. It's like, where's the door?
Yeah, but you usually have the
Can
ability to kind of snap out of it and sober up enough to make it to the loo, right?
depends on the dosage.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. There's always
These people,
exceptions.
a lot of our ceremonies, midway, people need a second dose. They didn't get quite enough. They'll take that, but occasionally it happens that they were just starting to get off at that point, so the double dose, and they can't even move for like 16 hours.
Yeah, that's true.
so,
Yeah.
so good, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so that's like the other level of the shared vision. Um, Now, is there something else that you present to people? Like, what about that experience of the void?
Yeah, right. So So we're kind of in the middle subtle realm. Low subtle realm might be just nature spirits, but the big guides, the godlike entities, whether they're in animal form or mythic, some other mythic form, uh, like a Buddha or an avatar or a Christ figure, they can appear. That's the high subtle. But the void is just beyond any form whatsoever, and it's that ever-present um, experience of uh, being consciousness bliss without any form whatsoever, and it's pregnant as it is empty. So all words fail it.
Mm.
Okay, but it's really the one life that's manifesting here and there, now and later. Um, Different epochs, different situations, and folding back into itself or rolling back into itself. So it's like if you say, I am water, that's my true nature. And this present form is Mikkal, this body. These are just holding that. But if you break the form, the water floats back to where it came from,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the art of not identifying with any form comes with stabilizing your experience of the void. And that can happen too with ayahuasca and with virtually any psychedelic. And it can be a crowning experience because it's liberating to realize that you are no form whatsoever, and you can interact with the realm of form if you choose,
Mm-hmm.
and how you
And you could
choose.
choose, yeah, choose how you interact with the
Uh-huh,
realm of
uh-huh,
form. Yeah.
uh-huh.
Yeah. So everything that you've laid out there resonates with me. I really have a sense that, you've accurately mapped out um, that cartography. I wonder, though, a little red flag comes up for me. As soon as we lay out a cartography like that with levels of experience, I always think that there's maybe a danger that people are going to be striving to go higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, right, right, right. That's right. And there's some use for that, trying to experience different states. So you have a taste of consciousness at these different levels or in these different dimensions. But I think the real art is to be here and present to what's happening now and exploring what's right before you rather than trying to distort it with some ambition to achieve something else that isn't here right now.
Yeah, that
So
ambition takes you out of presence immediately, right?
that's right. That's right. So you can't explore what's happening. So you can barely be aware of what's happening because you're waiting to be
Hmm.
somewhere else.
Now,
So you're not fully alive because you're off in virtual space somewhere, not attending to that either. Trying to
yeah,
grasp it.
yeah, totally. It's like, yeah, you're already time traveling to some idealized future point or experience. Um,
Exactly.
I'm wondering, a question that comes up quite a bit when I work with people who are using psychedelics. So one thing that I do see is that often people have these experiences and they're really affirming and nourishing to the spirit and the soul. They go back home, go back to their everyday life, and they start to feel that sense of soul loss again. And the only answer they have is to go back to the jungle for another retreat, another ayahuasca ceremony out in the country,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, right? So, how have you found? How do you counsel people around that? Do you encourage them to develop, like Thomas More called, a religion of one's own, like a daily ritual that helps keep them connected? Or do you think it's okay that we just keep going back to ceremony in order to get kind of reconnected to that?
I'm all about religion of one's own, as was Jung. As
Right.
was Jung. In fact, Jung was trying to figure out the new religion, and that's why it comes down to something like that. And he thought maybe 600 years from now, humanity would be able to have some type of consensual experience, something like a Quaker experience where you dip into stillness or silence,
Mm.
and then allow that whatever is the ground of being to speak through you, that maybe have help to someone else or something. But Jung himself, he had his own chapel, this tower that he built, with his guardian spirit or daimon painted on the ceilings of the upstairs bedroom, and stars, and he carved his different entities, these numinous figures he interacted with in stone. This was his religion in his chapel. He said, without this space, my life's work could not have come into being. His theurgy, which is a form of ritual worship and prayer, was a daily experience. And I have used that. Eliade influenced me to the importance of connecting with the center, Axis Mundi, which connects you with source. And so that's a place out of which you want to pray or meditate, chant, sing. I do it every morning. And I encourage people to do it. And a lot of my students and mentorees that I work with, I teach them how to get a symbolic life going. And I hope to hear back on its development, because I don't feel satisfied that they're grounded in an ongoing practice if they don't have some type of what Jung called a symbolic life. And that's what he meant by symbolic life, is some type of religion of your own.
Yeah, well, I think that's important. I was talking to a friend who's studied Jung, and he's now a registered psychotherapist, and he was saying, Jung is my religion. And I said, well, that's great in terms of like your cosmology and perspective and approach to life, but what's the practice? Like, I'm a big praxis kind of guy. I come from a blue collar background, and I'm more interested, like, okay, what are you doing every day to keep you connected so that you can get renewed and filled up and tune in and get the new insight and inspiration for the day. I don't see that many people taking up that kind of joyful discipline of a real kind of structured, consistent daily practice. I mean, what's been your experience of that? Do you find people are receptive and they've got the motivation to do it?
Well, this is a problem with our culture, is that we don't take the sacred that seriously. Psychedelics are easy. They open you up almost effortlessly, okay? But daily practice, that requires some intention, willpower, focus. You have to do something, It's not going to just happen. You have to do something. This was Maria Sabina's problem with Watson and Westerners that came down there for the mushrooms in Mexico, the Mazatecan way that she had. And she didn't understand it, but she was blown away. Her ceremonies were for healing. That was it. That was not religion for her. Even though she saw angels, she had this book that transmitted to her directly what she was to do and how to diagnose and pull out stuff. And it's quite amazing. But she viewed herself as a Catholic. That was the official way to view herself, And she said, if you're looking for God, go to church, But that implied practice, worship, pray, have a community. Just doing the psychedelics itself is not the religion. If you're not linking yourself ongoingly, daily, that's not really a religion. At least it's not one with any efficacy to it.
Yeah.
And so it's in our culture. It's overly materialistic, and in fact, it's the most materialistic and rational culture on the planet, right here in these United States. And Canada's not far away from that either.
No, we're right with you. We're just following your lead most of the time. So, for good or bad.
Yeah, but I've been working all over the world, 4 continents, many different cultures, and it's the coming back out of that, coming home to the United States, and the materialism is so palpable. It's certainly like a prison. I mean, everything seems so solid and concrete and unimaginative. And
that's why I think, for me, I really had to, after spending time in the Amazon and away when I was apprenticing to be a yoga teacher and all of that, I'd come home and I'd feel that, I'd feel that dominant culture closing in on me. And it made me kind of add more fire, more intention, more effort into my practice. Like it was a lifeline for me, and it has been even more now, especially with COVID time and being disconnected from other peoples in the communities that I would normally draw nourishment from. It's just I've had to double down on my personal practices.
Mhm. Yeah, we mentioned something about the heart earlier on. Maybe
Yeah,
this would be a good point to say something about that.
I'd love that. Yeah, thanks.
So, yeah, what I called the archetypal heart at one point. Uh, so for me, an awakening of the heart formally came through an apprenticeship with this Ecuadorian shaman, Don Alberto Taxel. I worked with him for 8 years. And he was not easy to work with for me because he was a man of few words. He was like a poet. And he would give very little instruction, but he wanted me to increase my capacity to feel. Okay. And then to greet every being I meet in every time and place from my heart. But it took me a while to realize it was from the heart. He would teach me these chants, One is, it goes like this. Tukui shunku anime. Tukui shunku anime. And you get up in the morning and you sing it to the plants, you sing it to the sun, the moon, and it opens up your Ushai or essence, which is, let's say, your true nature, your archetypal essence. And you're greeting a plant or a mosquito or a bird or the rain clouds, whatever it is, you establish a channel of connection
Hmm.
where love circulates
Hmm.
between you. So your sense of identity kind of expands into this greater cosmos of loving ecological relationships, sort of thing. And I asked him, trying to clarify who the feeler was. I said, well, where do I feel with? What do you mean by feeling anyway? And he
Hmm.
said, well, not the cinco sentido, the five senses. I'm talking about a capacity to feel. And I said, is it intuition? He goes, it's not intuition. I said, well, where do you feel it from? He goes, mi corazón. Like, you should know this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I opened from here. This is where my heart theory was born, really coming from what he was teaching me. You open from here, and the song comes from here.
Hmm.
And in his mythology, everything has a heart, an essence, and an ushai. Everything in creation does. So you put yourself in resonance with it when you greet it. You begin to establish relationships, and then it can reveal more of itself to you. Well, I found psychedelics did that too, particularly the mushroom, the psilocybin mushroom really opened me up to a very direct spiritual connection with all living things. But here was a way to do it as a daily practice, and he taught me, to do it the first thing when I wake in the morning, to greet my food. Every element of the day is to greet. And at night, to greet the night and the dream time, and then give thanks, express gratitude for your life during the day with all of your relatives. It was a very simple path. And if you take a shower, that's a water ceremony.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you let the water come inside you as well as outside, and you're cleaning out the inside, even the rivers in your arteries, and
Hmm.
veins, all the impurities, and letting it go down the drain too. If you go to the bathroom, you're giving your feces, you're giving food back to the Pachamama to recycle, and so on. So to become aware of this, and sing the chant as you're doing it. So there was a ceremony of eating, the ceremony of eliminating, the ceremony of going to water, the ceremony of the wind, letting the wind blow through your hair and carry stress away, the ceremony of fire that can illuminate you and also burn stress, burn negative energies, ceremony of earth. You can bury yourself in the earth, you dig into it, and it'll suck stress out of your body. It's a good thing for people with post-traumatic stress. And ceremonies of waters for purging and cleansing. And this was his little cosmology, and it was profound. I'm going to sing a little more of the chant now.
Yeah.
Okay. Hatun huerkocha pajama ma haspama ma dukuishin ruan kuyanimi. It's a kind of yikaro. But Hatun is the void. It's the great force of life, soon to be an egg of infinite boundaries. In other words, no boundaries. And inside of that is another egg, Wiracocha, which is like the collective unconscious. We work this out together through conversations. You know, it's like the supermorphic field that holds everything that exists and has existed and so on. And then Pachamama is Mother Nature, not simply Mother Earth. Okay. It's the material universe, present since the Big Bang. Okay. And within that is Ashpamama. It's another egg within the egg of Pachamama. Okay. Ashpamama is the planet Earth, then, the Earth's mother. And our bodies are made of it. So we're each Mother Earth walking and so on. And then within the egg of Pashpamama is all us individual versions, including the plants and insects and so on. So when you sing this chant, Tukui Shunguan Kuyan Hatun Wirakocha Batsamama Hashpamama Tukui Shunguan Kuyan. I spent years singing this around the garden and in the forest, you know, and just deepening into it. And so extending the boundaries of my love, the boundaries of my heart, you know, and actually learning to navigate by means of my heart through a simple little practice I call the NGS, the navigational system, which just noticing how it feels in here. It's just I have physical feeling, a bit metaphoric too, but you know, whether something feels right and in integrity with you or wrong and out of integrity with it. And navigating my choices, my yeses and nos, my free will being in line with that, you know, and my intention. And so my actions and what I create comes out of feeling here and listening to what it's telling me. And I find that I'm being invited all the time by my own guardian spirit, this entity with the wings spread out that I saw when I was having my spiritual emergency. Our relationship has deepened like Jung did with Philemon. And so I imagine it speaking to me through this system of the heart. So I mean, once when I open the heart and live this way, I'm aligned with the Axis Mundi. I'm aligned with my guardian spirit. I'm aligned with the source reality. So I'm in my integrity and I'm living my true nature. That true nature which gets shut down for most people once they're old enough, know enough language that the parents can begin downloading the cultural codes and shutting all that down so they can adapt to society.
Yeah.
So there's the cosmology. The cartography is built right into these chants. So when you're doing the medicines, you have it there available, supporting you as you're in it. And if you get scared, you can just sing the chant, befriend whatever's coming up.
Yeah. Accept it as part of that reality that you've opened yourself to through the chant. It's beautiful, you know. Before ayahuasca, for me, there was yoga. And my Indian yoga guru, Deskachar, would always put things so simply, just like your Ecuadorian teacher, simply and succinctly, right, getting to the heart of the matter. And he would say simply that chanting opens the heart. That's why he didn't concern himself with so much about like chakra systems and all this like progressive opening of the chakras and all that. You just say, you know, you start with opening the heart and everything flows from there.
Yeah. Now, Don Alberto, I could ask him, whatever I asked him, he could go into very deeply, you know. That always surprised me. But I noticed I was always initially wanting more from him, you know.
Yeah, more
give me the grand ideas, wisdom, these big rituals, you know. He says,
so
I
Western.
he says, I know you want me to be interesting. He said, the mind wants that. It's hungry. Give me hot ideas. Give me fascinating rituals, you know.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to show you is deeper than that, you know. And I finally got it, you know, that it's because he was strong where I was weak. He was a great teacher for me, you know, because here I am, this guy from Chicago with 2 doctorates, you know, and an analytic diploma, got everything worked out in my head, you know, and he's sabotaging that whole education system and allowing me to live from a different place.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Jung's typology, right? You had this real um, developed thinking capacity, and he had this real developed intuitive capacity. One very verbal, loves complexity, loves to know
Yeah.
more, like that magician archetype. The other more the lover archetype, less about talking about things, more just about feeling into them and sensing.
Mhm.
Like a beautiful marriage, right? Teacher and student
Mhm.
balancing each other out, teaching each other
Mhm.
what the other is more deficient, or the inferior function, as the Jungian might say.
That's right. And that's, I'm glad you used that word because it's exactly how I came to understand Don Alberto and why I should continue working with him was because of this inferior quality. Like he was speaking where I had this inferior uh, level of development. And so I needed that to develop more of myself. I was top heavy,
Yeah,
if you will.
yeah, yeah. I meet especially I think men in the Western or Westernized culture are often very top heavy. And when they get involved in psychedelics, they love to read like the Terence McKenna, the
Mhm.
Stanislav Grof. They love to read about all these like really heady concepts, and they love the maps of the psyche and the cosmos and all of that stuff. Get really kind of attracted to that. How do you, as kind of coming from that orientation yourself, how do you recommend that top heavy folks learn how to drop into their heart and balance themselves out in that way? Any kind of easy to grasp tips for people?
Well, one way is to practice what I was talking about here is like drop down from here to here and notice what you're feeling. And you ask yourself in the morning, okay, what kind of day do I want to have, or create, see what really stirs you here with a big yes, you know. And also notice when it's going, no, not so much, you know.
Mm,
That's one way. Just start developing a practice of based on feeling,
yeah,
from the heart. That's one way. Another way is if you have the shamanic practice or meditative practice where you have some type of guide or ishtadeva or guardian spirit. It's called a shamanism. These also uh, speak to where your inferior function is existing, and try, just like my teacher Don Alberto, giving you stuff that you don't readily know or can't easily access because your number one personality is just taking over and shutting it out. So when you journey or connect with that source, you're likely to get information or intuitions or insights, that you wouldn't otherwise get because you're
yeah,
screening it out.
yeah. Um, yeah, that's a big part of my yoga practice, is just that tuning in and listening. Yeah, seeing where my energy wants to move that day. Um, and that requires, that daily discipline of like showing up and doing the thing that works for you. For me, it's moving and breathing and chanting and that kind of thing. But I think everyone just has to find their own special sauce, what works for them. Other things that I think are been really helpful to me, and I think others, uh, paying attention to dreams for sure, and doing some like dream tending work. And something else that I've been doing is holding shamanic drum circles. One thing I find is that a lot of people I meet these days aren't connected to their dream life at all. They think that they don't dream. And so there's nothing to work with in the morning. And I think that just has to do with being inundated with images from the culture and messages from the culture, that they're just so full, there's no room for their own vision to emerge. But I found that, of course, psychedelics can be helpful in that the limpieza that needs to happen, the clearing out, so
Right,
the vision can arise. But also simply journeying with the drum in a well held space, that does have that
right.
feel of ritual, and all the five senses are engaged, and then that sixth sense can start to come more and more online. Um, what are some of the other practices that you work with?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the drum circle. We have it too. And the Crow's Nest communities that I founded here and in Belgium and France, South Africa, they're drum circles. And one of the ways I like about the drum circle is people journey in silence. We do it in the dark, kind of richer. And then we don't turn lights on after the journey, but allow people to kind of gradually come back and encourage them to share some nature sounds. So it sounds like a jungle in the morning coming
Oh,
alive as
cool.
people hear. Yeah. And then we just wait in silence until someone speaks. Ask nobody to interpret or inquire. Just listen, take it in, you know. So you never know who's going to speak and where it's going to come from. But the tapestry of visionary beauty is incredible. And often I found what one person says about their own experience touches
Mhm.
someone else deeply, you know. So there's like a
Yeah.
community healing going on through it. And people are having the shamanic experience of connecting with these transpersonal others.
Yeah. You
So,
know, I love that approach. You know, I've got my own approach to doing the drum journey that has kind of developed in me, and I've been experimenting with holding a space like that and seeing what feels right. You know, checking in with my heart. But I love just the simplicity of that, allowing others to speak, just like what you said, like in the Quaker religion, right? It's like
yeah,
we tune into our meditation of the heart, and we listen to the still small voice within,
yeah.
and then spontaneously try to be a prophet, try to speak that word out loud to share with others. I love that you brought that into this shamanic circle. And, you know, for me, these circles, what's been emerging in them, and especially during COVID, people are showing up, you know, and they're really getting nourished by them. It's filling a void in the culture right now, and it's giving me the energy to hold more of them and to continue with it, even though it can be exhausting, right? But you know, you're talking about Jung foreseeing 500 or 600 years in the future, there would be a shared religious experience again, maybe something like the Quakers. This has been the answer for me. And especially in this approach where we're drawing on the wisdom of the collective, you know, we're gathering together and seeing what emerges in that, what Michael Mead called the sudden community, you know, the community
Mhm.
that can happen just for a few hours. And I'm feeling really inspired that this could be a way to bring some ritual, communal, religious experience, you know, religious experience in the most direct and real way, to bring it back into our Western communities.
Yeah, I think so. In fact, community. So we were talking about the drum circle where we chant or sing these different animal sounds, the wild sounds of the jungle. So it's not my idea, but somebody. I encourage different people to lead the drum circle each month. We gather, and each person brings their own spin, their own creativity
Mm.
to it. And this was a man who's a digital artist. He's very, very intuitive kind of guy. And he added this. And
Mm.
so I think having shared responsibility, I'm trying to undercut my leadership because for like 13 years, I've been establishing communities, really shamanic communities around the world. And we had a big one in Belgium, big one in France, one forming in Italy, big one in South Africa, and so on, and here. And the tendency is to want to have a stable leader. I mean, this is somebody that's always running the show. And I've been frustrated with that model and working to get the attention off me as the teacher. Let's bring forth. It's like I'm trying to get people to step into the eldering role,
Yep,
try out
totally.
their own leadership. You know, the shamanism is about direct revelation. You know,
Yeah.
it's between you. And so get unstuck from the teacher. And one way to do that
Yeah.
is invite people who are ready in the community to step in and
Oh,
contribute.
That's so great, man. That's so needed. Yeah. Part of it for me, just even that, which happens in most kind of drum circles, everybody shares, even just that seems to be a much needed medicine for people in this day and age to share their experience authentically from the heart without trying to posture or worried if it's going to be cool enough or, you know, out there enough or whatever. But,
Mhm.
because people come forward with the most simple little visions. And it's often those ones that keep resonating within me weeks afterward. I'm still getting the teaching about, you know, uh, the other night, a woman talked about a vision where it was a little ant was leading her into a cave. And she wasn't quite ready to go into the cave, but the little ant was just patient and waiting for her. So whenever she's ready, she can go back to that ant and maybe start to venture into that cave. And so, like, sometimes we have this idea that the power animals are these really grand, fierce beasts, like the jaguar and the wolf or the eagle. But
Mhm.
sometimes the most powerful teacher is
Mhm.
like the smallest little creature,
Yeah,
talking about like patience, persistence, strength, the ability to carry the weight. So
yeah.
I love it. And helping people to trust their own, well, trust their ability to be a channel for that universal wisdom that can flow through us all if we're open to it, right?
Yeah, right. One thing that struck me about shamanism is the communal basis of it. It's always emerged in a community context. Had a lot of it had to do with survival and so on.
Yeah.
So we've got a model going on with neo shamanism, and it's very beautiful. But going to a retreat center, Joshua Tree, or in a hotel somewhere, which is how Harner started out, hotel lectures, and a bunch of strangers descend and get their own rooms and come in for the workshop and then go back to their rooms. It's not community, you know. So how to get that going? And many people within neo shamanism have developed their own communities. But I became aware that these communities need to get off the guru model or the teacher model, because if we want sustain, if we want it to live on, it cannot be dependent on the teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people need to carry it into the future.
Yeah.
So they've got the teacher in them needs to be empowered, or the leader in them, whatever you want to call it, ritual elder.
Yeah.
You know,
So great. So great. Well, it's been about an hour and a half, and it's just flown by for me. But
yeah,
I think
it
we've
has.
given people enough to chew on for a while. So I really want to thank you for joining up with me here and going on this little journey and sharing some of your experience. It's been really great for me to hear this. I feel like I found a soul brother or soul uncle of some
Yeah,
kind.
yeah. I feel that too. It's been very nice, and I thank you for the invitation. And I look forward to seeing what you post, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
So you've got some stuff coming up, actually, right, at the Crow's Nest Center, which is in Michigan, Upper Michigan.
it's in Southwest Michigan, which is
So,
towards the lower half. I'm not like 90 minutes away from Chicago if you drive around the lake. But I'm in a forest, and it's pretty wild here and fairly remote where I'm at. Most people would consider it remote. But you can go north of Michigan and go even more remote. But what we have coming up is we're holding space for Vision Quests. Several members of our community, I have land, a couple other guys have land, and we're providing this. When I say land, I mean a lot of land, forest, and everything, where people can have Vision Quests if they want to do that. So I've been trying to prepare those that want to do that for that. But at the same time, we have an intensive workshop. It's 5 days that overlaps at the same time and interfaces with the Vision Quest, insofar as those people will be support persons. But that's for some Toltec work we're going to do, in self-soul retrieval work, really self-healing.
hmm,
A wounded healer is one of the definitions of a shaman. Is somebody that is cleaning their own stuff out, taking complete responsibility for their own well-being. So that's what that workshop is about, and giving tools so people can do that.
yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that wounded healer archetype lately. And whenever I post something on my Instagram about the wounded healer, it gets a lot of response. So I know I'm encouraged by that, actually, that people are understanding that the real healer is the wounded healer, and that the wounds can often be the entry point into our own healing journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, this might even warrant another conversation just around that topic. So, if you're
Yeah,
open to it, I'd love to have you back just to talk about the wounded healer and get into that.
yeah, we can do that.
Great.
So
So, if people want to find out about the Vision Quest and the Wounded Healer training that you're doing, what's the best place to do that?
for that one, it's Crow's Nest Shamanism, one word.com. And just go to the events page. You'll see a link on the homepage that says upcoming events. Just go there and it will
Great.
direct you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you want to read more of Mikkel's work, he's got a lot of resources available on the website that I've just found really helpful. So he's got printouts on the little psychology of the heart and some of the techniques that you can use to tune into your internal guidance system. So please check it out.
And also see michaelsmith.com if you're interested in the mentoring stuff, and some of the papers I have around that.
Great. Well, thanks again, Mikkel. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it too. It's been great.
Hare